it's you and I, so we're going to push it to the next level anyway. Do we eat the homunculus, or does the homunculus have some pie?
Well, Cody, what should we create today?
I think we should do something a little on the zany side. Something that we haven't done before. Let's call it a stunt. Let's do something maybe that is kissing cousins to a holiday episode, but not really holidays. Something a little weird, something a little Nightmare Before Christmas meets Chucky, meets Valentine's Day, meets Boxing Day, something like that.
Not quite a holiday, but kind of a holiday. A holiday in a fantasy world is kind of like that. Or are you talking about just doing like a winter themed thing?
I kind of like the idea of creating a holiday of our own. Basing a whole world around a holiday, I think is pretty interesting. Kind of, the what is it? Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. That short story has such a fantastic world, which is based on one event. I adore things like that.
The lottery is kind of a holiday event for sure. Everyone shows up and stones their lottery winner to death. Oh, spoilers. If you haven't read it by now, you really should have. So I'm not going to regret that too much. All right, I like that. So holiday by definition means holy day, right? So if we have a holy day, that implies that we have some sort of God or religion at least, right? It doesn't have to be an actual God, just can be a God that people believe in. Or it could just be a festival, in which case it doesn't necessarily, like a harvest festival or something like that, doesn't necessarily need a religion or a deity around it. Create a God first, or just say, we're going to create an event. There's no God in the lottery, for example.
I think we should create a god, but I think we should do it in the fashion that we are so comfortable with, by standing on its head. I mean, we've talked a lot about dead gods. Maybe we should talk about at least one in existence god or remembered god. I like the idea of having an incredibly weird god that we can base our holiday around. A fresh out of the oven god.
Okay. Well, I mean, like literally a gingerbread god.
Ooh, let's do it.
When the movie Shrek came out, I got one of those little gingerbread doll plush toys that the arm you could rip off. And if you squeeze it, it would do say, "You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." That was hilarious. Had this as my computer icon for a decade. Anyway, silliness aside, I like that. All right. Well, so some sort of a pastry god, let's say gingerbread, right? But like a baked goods god, the god of baked goods, or the god that is a baked good, the god of pies, perhaps.
The god is pie, and man, we're leaning into the Eucharist with this one. I mean, we're going to literally eat the body of this god.
Yeah, but so then the god is a symbol. The god is created every feast day, right? So at this feast day, perhaps yearly, perhaps more frequently, the god comes together, and maybe the god takes a bit from each person. They contribute, sort of like a stone soup situation. They contribute each bit, and maybe it's literally parts. Yeah, shipping. I mean, we tend to slip a little horrific. Is this a meat pie? In which case it takes bits of everyone, or is it a vegetarian pie or something like that?
Okay, my brain is bubbly. I like the idea of a many parted pie, and grabbing a bunch of, say, regional folks who, for instance, these folks are primarily farmers, so they bring root vegetables and corn and things that you take from the earth. And then over here we have, say, more city-dwelling people who they are bringing, let's say, meats that because of the slaughterhouse in the city. And these folks over here are bringing the fruits of the ocean, and it's part of how it's regionally celebrated, and coming together to create that giant stone soup, many ingredient god, I think would be a really interesting thing to do.
I like it. I tend to wanting to make it a little bit more literal, with maybe the old ways are someone else also added as the god, as a stone soup, whether that's a victim that they picked up off the road, or whether that's, and maybe this is maybe we're in a more modern setting, but if you go off track a little bit, there are folks who still keep the old ways, which require a traveler to add their contribution, voluntarily or otherwise, to the soup. And maybe a one-handed man was a sign of a well-traveled man.
I mean, who
Yeah.
doesn't love a good kidney pie every now and then? So I'm down with that, and I love the idea of remembering the old days. A grumpy character is like, I remember when we actually took people, we found those hitchhiking folks, and I like that idea.
Perhaps in the cities, to make the magic work, it still needs a living contribution. But in the cities, it can just be a bit of blood. So blood from everyone at the celebration, at the feast, and that's enough to enliven the pie. That little bit of not just love, but plasma gives it that extra bit of kick. Sort of Eucharist in reverse. I mean, you add that, and then everyone, of course, has a bit of the pie.
I'm digging it, and I'm already seeing hijinks possible in the plot level of, last year we all got cold sores because we had to have Gary's blood, and everybody knows about Gary, and I like it.
All right, well, let's take one more step further. And then, so we have a baked good, it's a pie, it's the feast, everyone's going to eat it. Does it actually become temporarily not just a pie, but a god? That is, does it have an imminence or manifestation greater than just the meat pie at the table, or the veggie pie, whatever, as long as there's blood in it? Does it actually manifest itself, or does it call down a god? Or in the eating, does a god appear, or the spirit appear at the third, at the empty seat at the table, where it's actually the god manifest?
This is an interesting question to me because I think it balances out the idea of what is a plot point and what is a world point, and having that magnificent ability to shift between the two, I think, is really important here. I love the idea of a God manifest, and I love the budding society that we've just touched on here. People who are practicing the old ways. I want to practice the old ways when the God actually did show up, but no one really knows if they're showing up or not, which leads to a story element that we can add. Once we write these, we can choose whether the God shows up or not. But the idea that everyone is convinced that they have, or maybe they saw them, like last time, I swear I saw the God, or I like the unknown aspect of it, but I think there should definitely be a lore point where folks say, absolutely, the pie is God, and God arrives to eat themselves, or something like that.
I'm liking where this is going, especially if we say that the old ways and the modern day, whatever period that's set in, is that maybe in the old ways, with people giving actual flesh, enough people giving flesh, and maybe plus a sacrificial animal, was enough to actually inflesh the god. But without that, with just a little drop of blood or two, and maybe not entirely, not enough meat in the pie, the god can't even manifest, because it would just be like this little homunculus, and it's just below his dignity or its dignity. So maybe I like how this feeds into a plot point, as you're pointing out, where maybe someone decides to do like a really big heavy meat pie, the whole lamb, and they get the god, and weren't expecting it, because no one's seen the festival god in a century or longer.
This is perfect. It creates a really dynamic moment where not only that, we can define the god. I love this idea of a homunculus crawling out of the pie. I mean, that's creeping me out as we're talking about it. But then it's you and I, so we're going to push it to the next level anyway. Do we eat the homunculus, or does the homunculus have some pie? I want to know that moment, because I want to know what to expect inside the world lore. But I also think, since we're designing it around this holiday, it gives us a whole bunch of words to play with as we create. So, having your pie and eating it too, in this case, means you are the pie and then you get a bite of it. It creates a really interesting dynamic. I love that kind of wordplay in the construction. What do you think?
I like that. And the more I'm thinking about it, isn't there a nursery rhyme about someone jumping over a pie or coming out of a pie? Simple Simon, middle pieman, going to the fair, says Simple Simon to the pieman, let me taste your ware. Okay, that could be interesting. I like the idea of, I know, this comes to mind. I like the idea of the homunculus or something coming out of the pie,
Mhm.
and then maybe going back into it, like birthing from the pie and returning to the pie to then be consumed. It comes around and each person gives a blessing, or gives a blessing to each person, and then it's actually shared out. Or I don't know. And then in some traditions here in the United States, there's a piece, either a mini doll or a bauble, put into a cake, and then if you cut the cake, you get the piece in the cake. You're special.
Mhm.
we could bring something like that into as well, right? Maybe if you cut the pie and get the wrong slice, you're possessed of the god for the evening.
Ooh, that's a good one, because there's always going to be someone who's like, please pick me. And there's going to be most people like, no, I really don't want to be God ridden for the night. So let's not do that. But I like that a lot. So maybe the last ingredient is you. In order to eat the god's pie, the god has to manifest as a homunculus and then possess the person, who then gets the first bite of the pie, or of the evening, or finishes the last piece. Somehow we draw that loop. And inside doing that, the god has either free roam to go watch football, or to wreak havoc, or to bless the crops, whatever we want for the god at that particular moment. I like the possession part a lot, though.
Of course you do. Naturally. Well, okay, so that suggests there's a game. And the game at the beginning is some sort of lot drawing game. Either that's draw lots, or you cut the pie and you look at what's in that slice, and then you eat it. And the first person who eats the pie then is that person then possessed?
That might be part of the game. I like it, when you were talking about the doll in the cake. I really like that idea. You know, it's we've got a vague Russian roulette thing going on here. If we make that thing an ingredient, so if this is a stone soup pie, where everybody brings an ingredient, then one ingredient has to go in there for the god. And that can be, if you get the one berry, if you get the one piece of coal, or you get whatever the last little ingredient is, just one piece, then you're chosen. You're supposed to be chosen.
Great. I like it. And then you become the god, and literally it possesses the god for the evening, whatever that means in this world. We haven't really fleshed that out, so to speak. Dispense blessings. But as we pointed out, the god hasn't actually showed up for a while, because, as you know, gods love sacrifice. And the sacrifice of a little bit of blood isn't a big enough sacrifice to pull them. So you need a bit more of a sacrifice to actually bring the god down to possession. And so maybe in the actual story, of course, it's been a century or two, whatever. It's more of a tradition until someone actually does the sacrifice and to bring the god down. I like that. I like that quite a bit. At a dinner party where no one's expecting the god to come, and someone's missing. And where's Frank? No one liked Frank anyway. Well, but the god comes down this time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I mean, that's segueing into plot story a little bit. But so now we have that. Are you satisfied with where we are in at least roughly on the celebration?
Absolutely. Now I really want to know what's happening around the celebration. I want to know. So, you know, in Winter Festival, we put up lights and we have figurines and decorations. So how long does it take to build up to this festival? What happens around it? Is there kind of an economic thing that's going around it? I mean, do people sell little plastic pies for their kids? Do you get pie gifts, like a new pair of socks wrapped up like a pie? Is our world reminiscent of a modern world now? What are we going to do with our world too? Because our world is wrapping around this one event. I kind of like the idea of it being very similar to our world, but I want to put it on a cant. I want to make things just a little bit weird. One of my favorite films is the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and as they filmed it, they put all the doors at a slight angle in that film, and it drove me mad the first time I saw it. And I love the idea of doing that to a reader, is making the world similar, but just weird enough to where they're never quite comfortable in the skin as they're making their way to this pie.
It could be a modern world, which makes we're sliding into an urban fantasy, not paranormal fantasy with like the connotations of romance that tends to evoke, but urban fantasy. And it's a holiday time. Holiday times always tend to have a certain traditional feel about them, right? And so we can slide a little bit back in terms of maybe people arrive in swift electric cars, but they get out and they go on a sleigh ride to the cabin or something like that, right? That could work. World on a cant. Well, if we make it a little bit future, but future at an angle, right? So in our world, our futures are looking perhaps not as happy as a pie, but let's say things go really, really well. Imagine a world where, you know, everything works out, where we have a different source of power, electrical source of power, something like that, where everything is clean and bright, the air is perfectly clean, this world has managed to have the Industrial Revolution without having the industrial pollution that followed in our world. And perhaps it was because there was a God that the harvest God, that maybe did a few things to make things smooth away or erase the pollution, or did something to make it a little bit more easy to transition. What do you think of that idea?
I love it. It also hints at, I mean, it also hints at other gods and other celebrations that have to be done. So even though we might be, arriving to the pie dinner in an electric car and being dressed in, amazingly organic fabrics, and we walk through the door and somebody is mentioning, well, it's only 6 weeks until Harvest Fest, and we really, really need to get that harvest bundle. The cornucopia needs to go up. Otherwise, our car is just not going to work this year. If we do something like that, we sneak it in there as part of the world. It's something that is understood. It's religion, but it goes beyond religion. It's practicum. They have to do this in order to continue to understand whatever it is, their world, their technology.
I like it. I love it. So now we're sliding into this sort of folk magic, but folk magic enabling the technology to work. So for example, let's say, you have to bury dead batteries under the crossroads, or you have to put a little bit of that dead battery dirt on your computer or under the computer or something like that to make sure your computer keeps operating, or you need to take all your electronics to be blessed by the shaman or by the practitioner once a year or something like that. I like that because there are plenty of places where something like that is still being done, where you can get a scroll brush that has fortune for you and for your family and for your business and brings you money or whatever it happens to be. So I'm liking that. It doesn't have to be the like bones and things like that. Maybe it's just a little piece of paper. Maybe it's just the right email subscription service that you sign up to. Who knows, that sends you the blessing every year. But I'm liking it. I'm liking that idea of a little bit of this additional folk magic that makes everything seem a little bit weird. You get an electric car and dangling from the rear view mirror is a charm. Or maybe there isn't, there should be. And you're like, where'd the charm go? That kind of thing.
I love it. It's such and the more we can, when you said email subscription to appease the god, I immediately had this idea of, okay, so these gods are not only active like now, they're really digging what the world has created. So this isn't a god that lives in a barn. This is a god that lives in the Tesla factory. This is a god that, might bless your phone, or if you sin against them, they might garble your text so you can't use it anymore. So instead of your screen being cracked when you drop it, oh, Jebediah the god smeared my screen because I'm an adulterer, so now I have to go purify myself and it'll be fine. I love those kind of touches inside the world create that cant that I so appreciate, and it makes it such an everyday sort of folk magic and an everyday sort of religion that I really appreciate it. It's got carbon. It is real in their world, and I like it.
I can imagine someone getting pulled over because they don't have a safety amulet hanging from their windshield, and so the officer actually finds them, or gives them one and finds them, or something like that. So that brings it in, especially when there's a legal implication. It kind of brings it in and makes it a little bit more real. Again, that's a plot point, but I think that could tie into the whole aspect of the world where certain oblations are not forbidden but mandatory to do to live in this world. I want to swing back to the pie really quick, to this major festival. Seems like it's likely to be either a spring or a fall/winter. Spring because that's when lambs are around, so maybe it's a lamb pie traditionally. Winter because pie isn't something you can stick any old odds and end into it, right? And it's still good. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a whole roasted lamb. So I'm leaning, and meat pies especially seem to be very heavy. So I'm leaning toward a wintry, autumn/winter festival. What do you think of that idea?
I love the idea of a winter festival. Because the roots of it are it's winter, so whatever you have is precious, so it's going to go in the pie. the more precious it is, the more the god will notice. And that is at that point, if in the heart of winter, if you have fresh meat, it's a blessing. So if you put your blessing into the pie, the god might notice. It's also, I love the kind of duality of the comfort of it and the necessity of sacrifice at the same time. It has to feel like a celebration with just a hint of dread.
And this actually brings in a really interesting dynamic in the world. If sacrifice is what the god wants, then in our world, almost everyone can, at least in a quote unquote developed world like we're living in, can go get fresh meat in December from the store. So there's a little bit of money, but it's not a huge sacrifice necessarily. And so the quantity to make a pie to feed your family maybe is the sacrifice isn't there any longer. It's too small a sacrifice for most people for the god to be brought down. And so what kind of meat would have to go into the pie to really manifest the god?
That's an excellent question. So we can go full carnivore here and say people, but we can create a wider spread of what is precious too. So maybe that's how our accidental plot point of summoning comes into existence, is that the things that are precious haven't really changed in several hundred years, but somebody accidentally finds a precious thing and puts it in the pie, something that is rarefied and very precious at that time, and is a truly appropriate sacrifice. Maybe everybody has been using people for a long time and the god just hasn't showed up. They had their fill of people or lamb or whatever, and one of our characters finds the ingredient that is now precious, that is now a sacrifice.
I like that. I mean, that's the title of the story, right? The ingredient.
Hmm.
Okay. So dialing back out to larger world, we have a future world or near modern, but one in which everything feels pre-industrial compared to our world, because there was never, in this world, there is no pollution. There is no plastic problem. There is no climate change. These things are balanced actively, or the pollution that would have created them is simply didn't happen in this world. And everything is still has this weird touch of superstition that's not superstition, right?
So maybe the rituals are no longer working. Maybe the charms are no longer working. And this is the event that changes it.
Okay. So maybe not climate change, but charm change. But maybe that's what's kind of happening, is that the sort of folk charms that are keeping everything going, that those wells are starting to run dry. And they're running dry because, not because of some external mana, but because the wells of belief that actually drove those, that sort of spiritual aquifer, if you will, has been tapped by too much technology. Can't avoid that. That's been drawing on those wells.
It's perfect. It creates a resource problem, one that they're just beginning to understand. It gives us the reveal of the god arriving, which can either reveal that this is going to continue, or we're going to get instructions on how to do it, or worse yet, the god doesn't care and is just really hungry, or anything that we put in that plot moment or plot element is going to drive a story. I mean, it can be the reveal at the end of the story, it can be in the middle of the story, it can be the continuing plot arc for the rest of a novel. But I love the fact that our characters would have to identify and understand this as it's happening. So we're on the butt end of it. It's bad enough now to where the charms aren't working, the energy is failing, the technology is failing, and people are starting to speculate. So mimicking the reveal of greater climate change as it's happening, and then we have the gods coming back. We start with a pie. I really actually am digging this.
Okay, well, I think this is an interesting world.
It is. We're gonna go right in a world where a god climbs out of a pie. I mean, that's a holiday to me right there. That sounds like fun.
Well, it's maybe not a kraken, but something like it.
That's true. Well, Andrew, that is a wrap. I really enjoyed that episode.
As did I, and I hope our viewers did as well.
Speaking of our wonderful viewers, they can like, subscribe, and follow, and definitely tell their friends. And if they tap that little bell at the bottom there, they will be notified when our next episode comes flying around.
And speaking of this episode, if you would like to see what it looks like on paper, as soon as we write in it, that will be up on worlds.workingtitle.us if you subscribe for the writer and podcast support tier.
We'll see you again next time. And remember, we can create anything. Trust me.
And do.